Just like Spotify has your wrapped versions of all your favorite artists and songs from the year, we're here to wrap up the 2024 F1 season. We're going to go through each of the constructors, talk about their highs and lows of the season, and again, do a wrap up of 2024. It's over. We're done. We made it through. It was an exciting season. This is Turn 1. We're your host, Thomas.
And Jeremiah.
I want to start real quick by saying thank you for watching us throughout this entire year. If you haven't already, go ahead, like, subscribe, leave us a comment, let us know your thoughts on the 2024 season. It means a lot to us. Some quick stats for y'all. In this 1 year, we have grown 183 subscribers on YouTube. So thank you to everybody that has hit that subscribe button. We're still trying to grow our platform. It really helps us if you do that. And the crazier number is we've had over 1.1 million views across all of our social media platforms. So if you've seen our content, thank you. If you shared it, thank you. And of course, if you follow us or subscribe to us, thank you for that as well. All right, Jeremiah, you ready to get in some of these teams?
Let's do it.
Now, you like to start worst to best.
Always.
So who finished worst in 2024? It was pretty easy to find them.
I think you're looking for the giant green car going around the track. We're going to talk about Kick and the embarrassment of a season that they had this year. It was a shambles.
This is a shambles.
No, in all seriousness, though, you can't have multiple races with 30-second pit stops to where you're almost betting on it happening whenever they're going into the pits. It's like, oh, come on, 30-second pit stop, and then it happens, and you're like, yeah, I knew it. Meanwhile, everybody else is over here going 2.6, 2.3, and the faster teams are going like 1.9 on a really crazy day. But 30 seconds? What is this, 1970? That's outrageous.
The fact that the Kick Stake Sauber F1 team has two veteran drivers in Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu.
And neither of them, names.
Yeah, neither of them are rookies. They're not new to the sport. I don't even know what you said. What'd you say?
I said, and 4 names, because you were like, Kick, Stake, Sauber.
They've got a lot of names happening. That'll change when Audi shows up. We thought they were going to go the whole year without points. I even said in one of our videos, I think before the Vegas Grand Prix, that they will not finish with any points in the year. Zhou Guanyu somehow squeaked out 4 points in Qatar on a race where there was like 4 or 5 retirements ahead of them. So they got really lucky getting points in that race.
I thought Valtteri was going to do it on a couple occasions, but it just didn't go his way.
No, he got 11th in that race, so they could have had a double points finish.
On top of that, in Abu Dhabi, he finished qualified in the top 10. So
yeah, he's had his shots, as has Zhou. And again, we started out the year with unknown hopes about that team because the future of that team was unknown. They were, Sauber for a long time. Then they branded as Alfa Romeo. Then they changed to the Kick Stake branding. We also knew that their future was in question with the upcoming Audi coming into Formula One. So it seems like nobody's really pumping a lot of time or energy into money into the team. And their results kind of speak for that. Although we did give them a lot of credit in our livery episode before the season started for having a pretty good livery.
I still say to this day that it's probably one of the best liveries on the track. Didn't matter.
The fact that it says hashtag unleashed on the back.
And that green is such a cool color.
That was also the mistake I made where I said, oh, it's the only green livery on the track, and then completely forgot about Aston Martin's whole car being green. Yeah, they had a rough season, only getting 4 points, pretty much a low season across the board. Let's move up the leaderboard 1 spot to the Williams team, where you ended the season with a different driver pairing than when you started the season with.
It was a kind of a letdown just because we saw the kind of fights that Albon was bringing to the middle of the pack last year, regularly getting up in the fight, and we just didn't really get to see a whole lot of that this year. On top of that, they returned with the driver pairing of Logan Sargeant and Alex Albon, and again, Logan Sargeant amounted to pretty much nothing. In his entire F1 career, he got 1 point, and it was on a technicality because somebody got kicked down at the very end, and he finished in 11th, so now he's all of a sudden in 10th. Meanwhile, he gets replaced by the young up-and-comer Franco Colapinto, who immediately in his first race gets points, which means that he had more success than Logan did in his entire career in that first race. And Franco, honestly, he looked great. I mean, for a while there was talks about other teams thinking, oh, what do we need to do to try and get this guy? I mean, he might seriously have some potential. Along the way, we picked up a couple incidents where he slapped a wall a couple times, maybe got a little bit of too aggressive on some overtakes, but all in all, I think that he had a good rookie. I guess you could call it a rookie season, half season, whatever. I thought he looked good out there. I think that he will be a play for a future team somewhere on the grid. I don't think we've seen the last of Franco Colapinto.
I agree. I think he'll be around at some point in some capacity. Maybe not a full-time seat, but reserve driver or something, and maybe find his way into a full-time seat if somebody else messes up, like this year where Logan, messed up and got kicked out of his seat. Not the first time Logan was kicked out of his seat either, as he had to hand his car over to Alex Albon in Australia. That really shows you your place on a team, folks, when your team says, hey, this other guy crashed his car. We're going to give him yours.
Dude, for reference, on Ferrari, if Charles Leclerc crashed his car in qualifying, they would never go up to Carlos Sainz and be like, hey, get out of your seat. We need the car for Charles.
Never. Unless it was like Charles one race to finish the season and he's in the hunt for the driver's championship.
Right.
That's
Which is
it.
not the case at Williams Racing.
Not the third race of the season. Rough season all around again with Logan. Just to wrap up Williams, I also think Albon was a little bit underperforming this year, only getting 12 points. Way more inconsistent than in previous seasons. He was not as aggressive, I don't think, this year as he has been in previous seasons. That could be attributed to the car. Maybe the car this year didn't have the kind of speed and pace that he wanted it to have. Because we didn't see him taking the chances that he's taken in years past where he has flown off the track and into a wall.
Although we did see some magic in Canada, but that we'll talk about that later on.
We'll talk about that. Disappointing to finish ninth for the Williams team. Hopefully they get some more money pumped into there with the Carlos Sainz acquisition.
That's going to be so fun to watch. Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz. Oh, I just hope that Williams brings a good car because that's going to be so fun to watch.
Moving up once again, probably the biggest, the hardest to rate constructor on the grid, the RB Visa Cash App team. They are the Red Bull B team. They're the junior team, the development team. You know that they're never going to be in the mix for a top 4 spot. I think in years past, they've jumped up and claimed 5th in the constructors before. And I could be wrong on that, but this year they finished 8th with 46 points. You start the year with the pairing of Yuki and Danny Rick, and you think, hey, this is a team that can throw down some points, right? This is a team with experienced drivers. The car should be decent. And they didn't do so well.
I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, I feel like they had a pretty decent beginning to the season, but it really, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, at one point they were the front runners for the middle of the pack and the backmarkers. Obviously excluding Aston Martin and above, but I feel like I remember at the beginning of the season, the Haas's, the Williams, the Kickstake Sauber, the Alpines, they were all chasing that team.
Yuki had 6 points finishes in the first 10 races of the year.
Yeah, I feel like they did really good to start off the season, and then they just kind of disappeared.
Yeah, so after that, Yuki had a couple more points finishes. Danny Rick, of course, didn't have any points finishes. And then middle of the season around the Dutch Grand Prix, Yuki also fell off. That's when, they brought in Liam. He got points in one race.
Danny Rick had a couple points finishes, just not. I mean, he got 8th in Canada, 9th in Austria, and 10th in Belgium.
You end up with Daniel Ricciardo getting booted out of his seat just days before the United States Grand Prix.
Yeah, that one hurt because we went to the United States Grand Prix, and it was my chance to finally see Daniel Ricciardo in person. Also, we get there, and he's plastered all over all the posters and just nowhere to be found. He stayed home. He's like, look, I'm not even going to Austin. And we love him in Austin. That's the worst part of it. We love him in Texas. He's so funny. I want to talk about the transition to Liam Lawson, because where we saw Liam Lawson last year when he filled in for Daniel Ricciardo when he broke his wrist to the Liam Lawson we saw this year, it was kind of a letdown. And I say that lightly because obviously, you know, he's filling in halfway through the season, which granted he also did last year. It's tough. It's a weird situation. I just felt like we saw a lot more out of Liam Lawson last year, where he had more aggression. He was more risky. He got points, and it was. I mean, he was beating Yuki Tsunoda regularly, and then the Liam Lawson that we got this year, where it's okay now, it for sure is your seat, and it didn't feel like the same Liam. It felt conservative.
So let me ask you, do you attribute that pretty much 100% to that change of last year he was not in a seat for this year and knew he wouldn't have a seat for this year, so he had to show out, versus this year when he came in, he knew he was good for 2025?
I'm thinking that he was 100% trying to prove last year why he deserves to be on the grid. And this year, that was his seat. I mean, it was designated to him as a replacement for Daniel Ricciardo for the rest of the season. So I felt like he was more, okay, let's start getting a feel for the car. Let's make sure we're finishing races. Versus last year, it was, I don't care if I finish, I'm getting points.
Going back to Yuki, there's a big question now within the Red Bull organization. As of this morning, it's official that Checo Sergio Perez is out of his Red Bull seat, and I think you and I are both under the impression that that seat is Yuki's to have.
I don't think Liam's ready. I think that it would be interesting because you would have the young buck of Liam Lawson versus four-time world champion Max Verstappen. Kind of it could possibly ruin him, or it could cause him to take on a new spectacular form as he's hunting down Max. But I think realistically, it's reserved for Yuki. I mean, he's served his time in the B team, and all of the other drivers say that he's quick. We've watched Yuki be quick. We've watched Yuki be dangerous, sometimes reckless, but mature in these later years. And I'm ready to see him in the Red Bull seat. I want to see how fast he is when you put him in a top car.
Yeah, I don't know necessarily if he is ready. Okay, he can take the Red Bull seat, yes, and not, crash it or whatever. I don't know if he's ready to be an elite driver, but the question remains, like Jeremiah just hit on, we've never seen him in a top car. We have to see him in a top car eventually, or he doesn't need to be on the RB team anymore. He either needs to be out of the sport or move to a lower team.
Well,
RB is the development team. He's been developing for years. It's time to show it.
you said you don't know if he's ready to be a top driver. The fact remains that he's in his fourth season, fifth season, something around that number. Um, if you're not ready to be a top driver by then, you're probably not going to be a top driver. It's not like everybody gets long, fruitful careers in Formula One.
Right.
You get your first couple years where everybody attributes all your mistakes and your daring overtakes to you being young, and people forgive those. And then you're given your shot. And he's been in the seat since 2021. So yes, this was his fourth season. It's time to see him in a top seat. And if he's not a top driver, then he's not a top driver. He's probably not going to be a top driver. But it's time to see what he can actually do.
It's going to be a prove it year for Yuki if he does end up getting that seat at Red Bull. Now, question is, if that is Yuki's seat, who does RB replace him with? And I think at this point, you and I don't really have a lot of ideas.
No, I have no idea. I mean, Franco Colapinto would be a cool pick, especially since he's not going to have a seat next year. But I think that they would have to go pry him out of the hands of the Mercedes and Williams teams. I did also want to add one more note on Yuki, that this was his highest finish since all 4 years that he's been in. He finished in 14th his first year, then went 17th, then back to 14th, and this year he finished in 12th. Most points that he's gotten minus his first year, but I think that it's his time. There's no reason for him to be in a backmarker car anymore.
Okay, let's move on to what was once your favorite team, the Haas team, the American team that doesn't use that branding whatsoever, as they have two drivers that aren't American and they don't talk about America at all. What are your thoughts?
I won't say they're not my favorite team anymore. It's just I have a lot of love to go around for this sport. So I'll still always have a place for Haas. And Nico Hulkenberg and Kevin Magnussen by far was one of my favorite lineups that we've had. I think that Nico had a lot of potential that he could have brought to the season, and I think he showcased that. I think he had an incredible season with multiple points finishes. It was always exciting to see if he was going to get into Q3, and he did a lot of the time. Kevin Magnussen, while had to play the reservative role earlier on, got his penalty and served it. Once his driver penalty points went back down to 0, he's like, all right, game on. We can go back to how we were. And we saw a surge from Kevin Magnussen in the back half of the season as all of a sudden he was getting into Q3. He was getting points finishes. And I genuinely liked what I saw from Haas this season. I have 0 complaints other than the fact that they've decided that they're just going to tear it all down and completely restart next year, which is absolutely ridiculous. But we're talking about 2024. I liked what I saw from the drivers. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it was a good result. Again, Nico kind of led the way. Last year was different. When I say last year, 2023, Nico had sub 10 points or so, and Haas was kind of terrible all the way around. They finished 10th last year. Haas did. This year they jump up to 7th. They get 58 points, 41 of those coming from Nico, 16 from K-Mag. And yeah, you mentioned it. The end of the season, both drivers went on an absolute run of getting points. Not a lot of points, but getting a bunch of 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th place finishes, which does add up over time and really starts to separate you from those bottom 8, 9, and 10 teams to firmly plant you in the 7th spot. You do say that the kind of teardown is ridiculous. I disagree. We talked about this going into the 2023 season. The Nico K-Mag lineup could never be sustained. Those are two, older veteran drivers. Haas needs somebody young to build a program around. I don't know if I completely agree with both drivers being gone, but maybe you keep one around and bring in a young guy. But that's what Haas does. Haas seems to always bring in 2 young guys, and the last time they did that, it didn't work. It went horribly wrong the last time they brought in 2 young guys.
Well, here's my problem real quick. I want to jump in right there. It's not 2 young guys, and that's part of the problem that bothers me. I would love it if it had been Max and Oliver Behrman. I mean, not Max. If it had been Nico and Oliver Behrman, or if it had been Magnussen and Oliver Behrman, but it's neither Nico or Magnussen. They went and got the driver that got replaced by his own team before the last race of the season in Esteban Ocon, and that's the part that bothers me the most.
Yeah, and he's not the young. He's now the trainer, I guess, for Ollie Behrman, who you're going to build a program around. But Ollie Behrman's going to get picked up by Ferrari or some other team if he shows any bit of promise at Haas, and then you're just stuck with Esteban Ocon, which, as Jeremiah mentioned, is the type of guy that will crash into his own teammate on occasion.
Yeah. I have one more note for Haas as far as the season that they had this year. They haven't finished in this high in the constructors since their miracle 2018 season where they finished 5th with 93 points. This season, them finishing 7th with 58 points is their highest points finish and placement minus that one magic season back then. So they complete rebuild. They've had seasons with 3 points as their ending total. They've had seasons with 0 points and finishing 10th. And they've built themselves up to 7th place with 58 points. I thought it was a great season, and they have a whole new team principal, something we didn't even mention in Komatsu. And I think that they're on the right path.
Tying this into our 6th place team, which is Alpine, Haas should have beaten Alpine in the season standings if it weren't for Sao Paulo.
Yeah,
Haas
absolutely. 100%.
Haas would have been 6th. The point differential is plenty if you take away Ocon and Gasly's points in Sao Paulo. Moving into Alpine, disappointing, similar to last year, but they did snag points in a couple of the races at the end of the year, the back half of the year. The Gasly and Ocon pairing has never excited us. We talked about this when they announced it, that it's just super boring. They ended up parting ways with Otmar, who we saw at the United States Grand Prix. Whether or not Jeremiah chooses to believe me, I saw him standing at an intersection in a suit with a blue tie. It was him. this year was one of those years where they just weren't exciting until pretty much Sao Paulo, where they get a 2-3 finish out of nowhere.
Yeah, the team was kind of a joke. If I'm being realistic, I mean, you take out Sao Paulo and this massive surge that they have at the end of the season, and their entire season was pretty much worthless. I mean, they might as well have been another kickstake sour team. Um,
Well,
thank
they're
goodness
better
that
than
they
that.
brought the upgrades needed to clean their name up a little bit here at the end of the season. But I still think it's a failure of a year. I mean, you don't go from a team that's regularly competing for points to a team that's just nowhere to be found and has to have their season saved by a magic drive by their two drivers in one race where it's wet.
Alpine used to be that team that was, competing for a top 4 spot. They would oftentimes finish fourth or fifth, and they were kind of that barrier between the top elite teams and then the garbage teams below them. Now they are firmly in the garbage. They have 65 points. The team ahead of them, Aston, has 94, and then you have a approximately 400 point gap to the elite teams. They are nowhere near the Alpine or Renault of old, and there's really no signs of them cleaning that up. Who are their drivers for next year? You've got Gasly and Doohan going, right?
Yep.
I guess. I
You know,
guess.
I'm fine with Gasly.
He's fine. He's
I
the
know
better of
what
the two.
Gasly's going to bring to the table. I know he's going to bring a fight. I know he's going to bring points. We don't know much about Doohan yet. I'm sure we'll get to know Doohan, but it can't get much worse than Esteban Ocon. So, just saying.
Yeah. Let us know in the comments. Will Alpine finish with more than 100 points next year? My bet would be no.
I'm going to go with yeah. Let us know who you
They
side
had
with.
they had 65. They got to get 40 more points, and they got half of their points in one race.
I don't think they're going to do as crazy bad as they did at the beginning of the season this next year like they did this year. I mean, it was unreal how bad they were for the first half of the season.
Let's move on up to number 5, Aston Martin, finishing with their 94 points. 75 or 80% of those points coming from Fernando Alonso, the remaining coming from Lance Stroll. I'll say Alonso continues to show, even at his, advanced age, in his 40s now, he's still got it, man.
I
That
100%
car
agree.
that car is not what it was at the beginning of 2023. Of course, they didn't roll out the crazy good upgrades this year. They weren't able to compete with the top teams like they could for part of the 2023 season, and Alonso still found a way to get it in the points more times than not. He squeezes every bit of juice out of those Formula One cars, and not to get into 2025 or more specifically 2026. I don't know if Alonso is going to be around in 2026, but I would love to see him drive an Adrian Newey built car.
With the new regulations, oh, yeah, absolutely.
Now, talk about your favorite driver.
Probably the joke of the grid. The man's a clown. The man goes off track on asphalt and then says, before the race starts on the formation lap, and then decides, oh, let me rejoin the track. Oh, I'll just cut through this gravel pit. Oh, I can't move. I'm beached. You're going to have to get the crane out here to come get it. It was and it is every year. It's a joke of a season for Lance Stroll. I don't know how he has a C. I know how he has a C. It's Daddy Stroll, and that's fine. I get it. Get him out of there. Go buy a NASCAR team. Stick him over there. Go buy anything else, man. Go put him in GT cars. I don't care. Get him out of this sport. I'm so tired of it. You put anybody else in that car with Fernando Alonso, I guarantee you they have a better season. I guarantee it. They probably still finish in fourth or fifth just because of the teams that are ahead of them. But man, especially last year with the car that they rolled out, if you had anybody else in that car but Lance Stroll, Aston Martin would have had a year. It's a joke that's been overtold for far too long now.
You could have had a 140, 150 point season with any other driver because not only would that driver be getting points similar to Alonso, but you could now help each other out because your drivers are close to each other in races. They can, use each other for DRS. They can use each other for strategy. They can plan their pit stops better. When you have Lance Stroll out there just doing a bunch of nothing, it really hinders your team and it takes away points from both drivers. He got all of his points in the first 13 races of the year and then proceeded to just not get any points for the final 11
Yeah, you know what that means? That means he might as well have not showed up
for
for
the
those last.
final 11 races of the year.
It gets me so heated, man.
In the
It really
car
does.
that finished fifth, he didn't get points in half the races.
It's unreal. I mean, this might be a stretch, but maybe they could have brought the fight to Mercedes. I mean, realistically.
Yeah, you start stealing some points. It would have been tough, but it would have been more interesting what they had. Again, I don't know if that's overly disappointing for us, just recapping the Aston Martin season. We knew what we were getting with Fernando. We knew what we were getting with Lance. I think the car was a little bit disappointing. You expected them to have something better than this year to get Alonso some more points like they did last year. We talked about this early on. We've done 2 videos on this. We did a video titled "What Aston Martin Got Right," and then we did another one on their new facility that they rolled out in the UK. And we talked a lot about their team that they built, their engineering team, their design team, their factory team. They got a lot of the number 2 guys across Formula One from Red Bull, from Mercedes, from Ferrari, from, Renault. They took a lot of those guys and put them together. They had a really good first build in 2023, slightly disappointing results in 2024. That's why I think we're under the assumption that they felt the need to bring in a newie. Hey, we got a lot of these guys that were like second in command. Let's go get the guy that was in charge of the whole thing and see what kind of ship he can run.
I'm hoping he can take this team of supposed to be high rollers, but what's showing to be a bunch of ragtag guys here. I'm hoping he can take this team and put their minds together to build something special for 2026. Because as it stands right now, you're 100% right. They went and they grabbed all of these guys that were high up in their systems at all these top teams, put them all together, and they're not, I don't know if they're not meshing. I don't know if they're not agreeing, but whatever they're doing is they're not producing. And last year they had a good car. Ultimately, it was deemed as the green Red Bull, and it had crazy results. But you can only copy the best team for so long. Eventually, you have to have your own ideals. You have to take a car and be able to modify it in a way that is your own, that is productive. And it just feels like they spin their wheels for the entire season and don't really improve, don't really go down, just kind of stay right where they're at.
If only Lawrence would buy another team so that Lance could race on it and ruin it and Aston could go to greatness.
If only he would just buy another team in a different sport.
Welcome to Formula E, Lance, where no one's watching.
Oh, man, come on.
Look, at some point we'll watch it. I
No
know. We'll
dig
get
to
there.
Formula E. I've watched some races, unlike my uneducated friend here. It's pretty cool.
Look, you can either watch it with the sound off or mute it. It sounds the exact same.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. All right. Number 4, stepping up into the big leagues. Again, we go from Aston at 94 points in 5th place to Mercedes in 4th place with 468 points. What a gap.
Yeah.
These are your contenders that we're going to talk about here. You had, for the final time, the pairing of George Russell and Lewis Hamilton. This was Lewis's goodbye season at Mercedes as he announced his departure to Ferrari before the season even began. So before we ran Bahrain or any of the early season races, we knew that this was Lewis's last race. And honestly, while they finished 4th, and I know they would have wanted to finish higher, that's not a bad season. The fight was there between all top 4 teams. Every one of those teams grabbed victories throughout the year. Both of their drivers claimed wins throughout the year, even with George losing one of his wins to Lewis for getting disqualified. There were definitely races where Mercedes was just on. We saw it in Spa when they went 1-2. We saw it again in where did they finish really, really high? Vegas, where they go 1-2. That's it. They had 2 races where they go 1-2. So there were just certain tracks that were built around their car, and they had everything right, and they show you that they're still Mercedes. What are your thoughts?
It was a tough season for me to watch as a Lewis Hamilton fan. It obviously, I'm not going to jump into speculation here, but it really felt like the team was geared towards George Russell. However, I did enjoy getting to watch Lewis Hamilton snag 2 wins this year, especially since he hasn't been able to get the job done realistically since 2021, where he was snubbed at the championship. I mean, I believe that was his last win. Yeah.
2021?
Yeah. So for
9
him to have 2-year drought.
900 plus days.
Exactly. So for him to have a 2-year drought was just unbearable. And for him to get his first win in 2 years in his hometown of at Silverstone was the most magical moment I could have ever, dreamed of as a Lewis Hamilton fan. Getting to see him with the flag, putting it around his shoulders, driving with the flag, and he's sitting there, he's crying, talking about how much it means to him. Rightfully so. I mean, realistically, when you go from a season where you're winning every single race, it's like, you get to, oh yeah, good job at the factory, good job boys, well done, and we'll go get them next time. And you have 2 seasons where you just don't win at all. Of course, when you finally do get one win, it's just this dramatic moment. And then to do it 2 races later in Belgium, I mean, it was amazing to watch. And then, of course, I have to give kudos to George Russell for getting his 2 race wins. Yes, it should have been 3. Sucks to suck. We're going to give the other one to Lewis Hamilton. But for a Mercedes team that's been struggling the past 2 years, to see 4 race wins spread evenly among the 2 drivers, I mean, it was nice. It was a good send-off for Lewis Hamilton, but it was good to show the world that, hey, we have George Russell. He also got 2 wins, and he's going to be here for a while.
I'll also argue from a car build and design perspective, I think they had a better car than Red Bull.
That's
Both
tough.
Mercedes drivers finished ahead of Checo, and if you take Max Verstappen's just insane ability to drive a stupid Formula One car out of the mix, I think Mercedes beats Red Bull.
That's tough. So you're saying you take Max out and put like anybody else in that car?
Anybody else?
Jeez, maybe I would put him above. I would put him right below the Red Bull car still, but I would say that they're way more even than they've been in the past 3 years.
Like, my whole argument there is, yes, they finished 4th, and it does stink if you're a Mercedes fan, but you're not that far off. You're not.
Right.
You're really not that far off.
Absolutely.
It's going to be really weird this offseason. I'm sure it is for Toto and the team as well, for them to not have Lewis around, to spend a whole season designing the 2025 car with Lewis not in mind, with George Russell in mind, and they're bringing in the young gun Kimi Antonelli, which, how long has it been since they've had a true rookie in that car?
I think it's going to be fun to watch. I'm a huge fan of Kimi Antonelli. Never really been the biggest fan of George Russell, if I'm being completely honest. It's sorry.
He's got something about him.
But I like Kimi Antonelli. He's fiery. He's young. He thinks of himself as really good. And typically, when you have that kind of drive and self belief, that you need that in Formula One. And I think we're going to see great things from him.
Moving up to the team we just talked about, number 3 with 589 points, so about 121 points more than Mercedes, is that Red Bull team. This one is weird to talk about. You have 2 polar opposite drivers, which was not the case last year, but is the case this year. Max Verstappen just continues to show that he can outperform any car he's given. He turns it on when it's needed. Of course, he had early season results, kind of fell off middle of the season, and then just went to work the back third of this season, getting the points that he needed to secure the Drivers' Championship. And then on the other side of it, you had Checo, who just completely fell off from the season that he had in 2023. The guy struggled to get points finishes. He struggled to overtake people. If he didn't qualify in the top 7 or 6, it was really hard for him to stay in those points places. What are your thoughts on the Red Bull team?
I mean, I was always an advocate that Checo should have gone before this season started. I mean, not to sound harsh, but I feel like he wasn't measuring up to what that team needed. I think Max is an insane driver, and we didn't have a car necessarily where he was able to run away with things. We had a car that was slower than the McLaren, slower than the Ferrari, but a driver that was faster than both of the McLaren drivers and faster than both Ferrari drivers. And I think that no other race showcased that more than whenever it was completely soaked in Sao Paulo. And we got to see the sheer rain genius behind Max Verstappen as he climbs all the way up the grid and takes the win. Meanwhile, George Russell and Lando Norris are battling out like kids and end up costing each other the win. But I mean, essentially, I mean, look at where his teammate finished, Sergio Perez. I said that he should have he shouldn't have had the seat for this year, but it's not. I'm not saying that he's a bad driver. I mean, he's a race winner, multi-time race winner, and he is essentially like what you would expect from a Formula One driver. Maybe not the top of the top, maybe not the Michael Schumachers, the Lewis Hamiltons, the Max Verstappens, but he's essentially what you should get out of a Formula One driver. And so you see him finishing as far back as he did, but yet you see Max finishing as high up as he did. That just attributes, or that credits Max with exactly how much he's worth to that team. I mean, he is next level.
I'll say that something wonky happened with Checo this year, and I'll go back to one point that you made, which is that you argued that he should have been gone before this season. I don't know how you can make that argument when he finished second last year to Max. That's really tough to say. Hey, the guy that just finished second to the champion should be out of the seat. But I get what you're hinting at. He could have done better. My question is, Checo starts the year in 2024 going 2-2-5-2-3-4. Pretty good. Those are good results. That's good enough to win you the Constructors' Championship if you're Red Bull, if you do that with what Max was doing, which was pretty much winning all of those other races. He did not get a single top 5 finish after that.
And that, you know, you could see it coming. And the reason I say you could see it coming is if you look at the 2023 season when Max was just completely dominating through and through, Checo didn't have that level of consistency that we needed from him for me to be able to say, okay, he should have that seat. In fact, the only reason that he finished second in the Constructors is because he had the race wins when nobody else could get points that high because Max just kept taking all the wins. We're talking about Checo had the fastest car on the grid, and his inconsistency barely squeezed him into a second place in the standings victory last year. And this year, it completely fell apart because they no longer had the fastest car on the grid, and it was completely evident of what his abilities were in comparison to Max's. I just think if you had like a Carlos Sainz or maybe like obviously like a Charles Leclerc, but
even an Oscar.
Maybe even an Oscar Piastri where you know you're going to get a level of consistency from him. I think we would have saw a lot better results, and not saying that he would have brought the fight to Max, but it would have been a closer fight.
I'll just say I think the car hindered both of the drivers this season. Definitely there was something off at the Red Bull factory this year with the overall car build and then mainly the upgrades. The reason that I brought up Checo's first 6 or 7 races of the year, that's about when teams start rolling out their first upgrades. And we know that Red Bull rolled out bad upgrades their first time through. They admitted that they rolled out bad upgrades. They went back to previous builds. They used, didn't they say that they were like making hybrid versions of their upgraded floor design because they started with one that kind of worked and they rolled out a whole new one that didn't work. And then they made some kind of mashup of the two designs. I think that change is what threw Checo off, and he just isn't that level of driver anymore to work with those hindrances the car were throwing at him. And so he finished where he finished, which was in 8th place. Meanwhile, Max took a little bit of a dip when those issues started happening with the car. But then once he figured out that car again, it was like, all right, I'm Max Verstappen. I've got this thing down.
It was really cool to see Max as he pretty much again dominates to start the season off, and then as the season progresses slowly starts to become another driver at the front, and then at the end when people were starting to question, oh, is Max going to win the championship, he was like, oh, what, you're questioning if I'm going to get the job done, hold on, and then proceeds to push way harder than he needed to at the end of the season and lock this thing up before the final race of the season.
Yeah, all he had to do the last 6 or 7 races of the year was beat Lando, and he did in almost every single instance.
It's just not necessary.
Which he wasn't doing the whole middle third of the season. He was consistently losing to Lando when Lando got his first win in Miami, and then Lando got his second win, and then Oscar was getting wins. There was a battle there from the McLaren drivers, and then he just put the pedal to the floor and shut him out. Okay, let's move on to number 2 in the driver standings, the Ferrari team. And I will say that I think Ferrari kind of had a quiet year, a little bit under the radar. They weren't consistently in the fight between Red Bull and McLaren for either the drivers or the constructors championship until the very end, when it was apparent that Max was going to win the drivers and McLaren might win the constructors. But who's in second? Not Red Bull. Ferrari.
I think Ferrari was completely aware of their limitations of this season, and I don't think that their race. I mean, obviously, every year the team is racing for the championship, and don't ever think that that's not the case. But I feel like Ferrari, knowing their limitations, was trying to pick their battles per se. They wanted Monaco. Charles Leclerc had a curse. He wanted to clear this curse off of his shoulders. It's been carrying weight. He wanted to get the job done. He got the job done. In a season where Ferrari wasn't winning races, Ferrari won that race. Then we fast forward. Now we're in Monza, the Temple of Speed, home of the Tifosi, home of Ferrari and everything else. And again, in a season where Ferrari is not winning races, Ferrari is not in the conversation, and we're just going to slide in here. Excuse me. I'm just going to take this on the way out, and we're going to win this one real quick. Again, gets the job done in front of the home crowd. Their season was quiet, but I feel like they were accomplishing the goals that they were setting for themselves in their own season. I feel like they had their own mindset for what they wanted this season to be, and I feel like they set out and they achieved exactly what they wanted.
Yeah, you had Charles with three wins, and you had Carlos with 2, I think.
Two wins. Great season. Absolutely great season.
5 wins. That's pretty good considering you were battling again with a McLaren car that was insanely powerful, the Max Verstappen Red Bull combination, Mercedes jumping up and stealing points with both their drivers in 4 of the races. A really good quiet season. And honestly, I kind of wish Carlos would have gotten 1 or 2 more victories just on his last goodbye season at Ferrari. As he knows before the season even starts that he's getting replaced by Lewis, which he just wanted to have a season, which 2023, he was the only non-Red Bull driver to win a race in 2023. 2024, the guy jumps up and wins 2 races, helps propel your team to second in the Constructors' Championship, and goes into Abu Dhabi with a legit shot at winning the Constructors.
Be mindful of this as well. Carlos Sainz is doing all this without knowing where he's going to race next year.
Right.
Until the announcement for him moving to Williams didn't even come out until the second half of the season?
I want to say it was like even after we were in Coda. I don't think we knew. I could be wrong, but it was late.
My point exactly, though, is that he goes and gets the wins. He's fighting for his place in the championship, fighting for his place in the constructors, doing all this for Ferrari without having a seat in the next year. He's talking to these top teams. He's not hearing the things that he wants to hear. And he's probably nervous and nerve-wracking. It's nerve-wracking thinking about something like that while you're sitting here trying to perform in one of the fastest cars on the planet. And here he is going in every single week and getting results. Silently, of course, but results nonetheless.
Yeah, and they finished at 652 points, just 14 points behind McLaren. And again, going into Abu Dhabi, they had a legit shot at it. They just needed McLaren to make a mistake somewhere. They did their part, finishing second and third in the race, but Lando got the win, and that ultimately sealed the deal for McLaren. But that's about as good as it gets going into the final race of the year.
And you can't ask for anything more. You want in a season where you are not in the talks by any of the reporters, any of the fans for one of the teams to take home the championship, to be fighting for it in the last race. That's exactly what you want. I mean, you couldn't have asked for a better season.
Do you know what kind of blow that would have been to McLaren? Not only did Lando lose out on the drivers to Max by getting
Man.
stopped in the second half of the season, but then you lose it in the last race to the team you weren't even worried about.
They don't even get it done in the constructors. Oh
Man, hey, Fred Vasseur, maybe a good hire.
Fred Vasseur, you are doing wonders for that team. You have all essentially fixed the strategy problems.
Yeah,
You've fixed the tire wear problems. You've
porpoising.
yeah, it's been a beautiful show to watch, and you're doing a great job, man.
We're not seeing Charles Leclerc scream his head off when you have pit stop blunders anymore.
Right, exactly. I mean, Fred Vasseur is doing a marvelous job at Ferrari.
Stay out. No box. No, stay out. No box.
What are you doing?
It's the shambles. All right. Number one, the team that brought it home and had, I mean, they just had a year. They started this in the back half of 2023. They continued it into 2024, and they did what needs to be done from a top constructor, McLaren. They took their young driver pairing of Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. They got wins when they needed to get wins. They beat out the Red Bulls when they needed to beat the Red Bulls. They beat the Ferraris when they needed to beat them. And they didn't run away with the constructors, but they beat Red Bull by almost 100 points and had a good season.
Hold on. You said they got wins. Let's highlight this a little bit. They got their first wins of their careers, as we've been waiting for this moment from Lando Norris for years now. I was a Lando Norris fan when he first started at McLaren, and it's always been hard watching him as he was driving behind Carlos Sainz and then getting compared to Daniel Ricciardo, even though he was way faster than Daniel Ricciardo. And then McLaren trying to bring him the car that they need to bring him for him to fight. He's watching George Russell win. He's watching Charles Leclerc win, two guys that he came in with. And finally, man, he breaks through. Finally, he gets his first win and adds more to it as the season progresses. Oscar Piastri in his second season gets his first win, adds more to it. I mean, this was an all-around just wonderfest for the team. So fun to watch. The energy was so high. If you're a Papaya fan, you had a heck of a season, and I know you enjoyed it.
The fact that, like you said, usually, drivers get their first wins, it's a big deal. But for Lando, it was something special because we had talked about this.
Didn't he have a record?
Yeah, so we talked about this early in the season. Maybe Australia or Japan, he officially eclipsed the most races run or whatever without a Grand Prix, or it was most podium finishes without a win. That's what it was.
God.
Most podium finishes without a win, and then like literally the next race or two, he gets his first win. We're like, oh, all right, well, there goes that.
Miami was beautiful, man.
He proceeded to get 3 more, so he had a total of 4 wins across the season. Oscar definitely helped out with his 2 wins, although questionable team orders at McLaren. I think for 1 second, let me dive into this. They won the constructors. Love it. That's great. They could have cost themselves a driver's championship. Now, the driver's championship wasn't that close to the end. Max ran away with it. But earlier in the season, when it was a battle between Max and Lando, they cost Lando some points.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was a good look for them. I think that put Lando's future with McLaren in question. And had they had not ultimately come out winning the Constructors' Championship this year, I think Lando's calling other teams.
Maybe Lando makes that move to Red Bull.
Or, like in our F1 2024 game, Sergio does.
Now, Sergio went from Red Bull to McLaren, and Lando went to Red Bull. So
they just switched teams. That was the craziest thing ever.
It was awesome.
Look, I think they know now what they have. We talked about this 2 weeks ago or so. I think the wins came to them really fast this year. The success came to them fast. I don't know if their strategists were ready for how to handle the points in these situations. I think next year they will have that figured out where early in the season, let Oscar and Lando battle. But if Lando has any competition for winning a driver's championship next year, you've got to get Lando the points. You just have to. especially if he's leading the race.
This is contingent on the fact that Lando is still faster next year. We have seen Oscar slowly but surely chomp at that gap that Lando sets to him in the actual race form, and he's slowly but surely making it more of a battle with Lando Norris. We could very well see next year the Oscar Piastri show. I mean, these guys are really close to each other. I'm still going to lean on the side of it being a Lando Norris show if there is a show at McLaren, but we could see some magic happen from Oscar Piastri.
I agree. I think that's why you open it up and let them fight for the first, couple races of the season, see how they are driving, see what points they're getting. And then as the battles kind of show where they are in the point standings, you lock in on your strategy on who's your 1 and who's your 2.
Absolutely.
But hey, credit to Zach Brown. That guy has had a really roller coaster ride as CEO of McLaren. He was very close to being fired a season or 2 ago. And if he didn't have the 2023 second half of the season like he had, he wouldn't be there this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And on top of that, I think with this championship victory for them in the constructors, I'm pretty sure that this sets a record for the longest time in between constructors championships for McLaren. They finally surpassed it. They finally got the job done. They can rest easy knowing that they finally got a gosh darn team win instead of just individual wins like Lewis Hamilton in 2008. And it's interesting. I'm excited to see where this team's going to end up in these next few years.
Yeah, their last constructors championship was 1998, 26 seasons ago.
They haven't had one in the turn of the century.
They haven't had one since the existence of Red Bull Racing or Mercedes.
Yikes.
In the time that Mercedes and Red Bull have collected all of their championships, McLaren hasn't had one.
Anyway, welcome to the 2000s, McLaren. Glad you could finally show up.
Look, they're well positioned to have a run in 2025. The game changer is going to be 2026, which we're not even close to at this point. If they continue this progress with the bar, just going exponentially up like it has the past 18 months for that team, I said this in our predictions video. I think they're going to run away with it. I know you have a different perspective with Lewis going to Ferrari and having the Lewis and Charles combination, but I am a firm believer that McLaren dominates next season.
It's going to be interesting. It's going to be a fun show to watch. I think that Ferrari's going to have potential with the new lineup. But I think that McLaren has been onto something since last year, and they built on it a lot this year. They're going to continue to build on it next year, and we're going to see where it ends up before the rule change of 2026.
Okay. Anything else you want to get into?
Guys, Lance Stroll is terrible. Get him out of the sport. I'm sick of it.
That's one way to end a video. I was going to say, comment your favorite moment of the season.
Get him out.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking with us all season. We have one more video to release, possibly this year, possibly early 2025. It's going to be our 2024 award show video where we hand out the best and worst moments of the year. So be on the lookout for that. And like we mentioned at the top, if you haven't already, please subscribe. It really helps us out, and share our work. If you've got friends that are into Formula One, or if you're trying to get your friends to watch Formula One with you, hopefully our videos are a good way to get them interested in that. With that, we'll see you.
But guys, come here quick. Hold on to your we'll see you. Come here, get closer, real quick. Logan Sargent to the Red Bull number 2. All right, that's it. I'm done.
Bye.